I'm Lisa.
Fred.
I'm Victoria.
Victoria, Cecile. I'm Karen.
Mike. Tim. Tom.
Nancy.
Bruce. Tim.
Chris. Great.
Hey, Chris.
We may have some, we'll leave this open for a little bit because we may have some people join us late. Basically, the presentation tonight and discussion is hopefully you're here to talk about this idea of downtown co-housing in Blacksburg. And we're aware that everybody possibly has different levels of knowledge about what co-housing is and what the key elements are. So some of you know a lot about it and sort of probably more than you want to know. But so it may be repeat for some of you, but so we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about that, and then we're going to get into discussion and then hopefully some talking to one another towards the end. So my name is Lisa Poley, and I am a long-term co-houser. I live at Shadow Lake Village and have been there for about 10 years now. And I was one of the group of people who got the project built, although Fred was the person, Fred and Nancy were the ones who kind of got it started. And so basically, my interest in co-housing started when I was about 19. I read the co-housing book, which is back there, and was lucky enough to get hooked up with this group in Blacksburg. And then I served as the project coordinator for the group for about a year during our rezoning and our design and hiring professionals phase. And then I subsequently went on and got my doctorate in environmental design and planning, and I focused my dissertation research on co-housing and civic engagement. And I've been on the National Co-Housing Association board for 3 years, and now I'm starting a little enterprise with Fred that's the mission of our little enterprise is to try to help support co-housing get started and help co-housing groups succeed, get to the finish line with local communities. So, and the reason that we're doing this is that we're really excited about co-housing. So, and for me, it's about, I really have loved living in this neighborhood, Shadow Lake Village, and bringing up a kid there. And so I feel like this is a housing option that more people should have the opportunity to experience. And it's maybe not for everybody, but it's a really good housing option for those of us who appreciate its benefits. Do you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
I'm Fred Vignon, and as you were saying, Nancy and I got, my wife Nancy here, and I got the ball rolling initially on Shadow Lake Village back in '97. And so now after 10, we moved in 01, I think, 02. So after about 10 years, I think we finally, at least I got enough over to, not really burn out, but just the slog of creating that we were ready to, it turned out it was wonderful. The person we found after 10 years was really great. And so we wanted to go about promoting co-housing in the Southeast United States. And we started Village Resources, which is a small, to us business organization to help do that. So that's what we're doing. I'm also a psychotherapist in my day job.
And so the reason we're doing this tonight is it's part of the mission of what we see ourselves doing is trying to educate people about co-housing and help people feel equipped if they are so moved to start a group and get things going. So so what we wanted to do, at the very beginning, we found this kind of funny 1-minute video that attempts to sort of capture co-housing in a nutshell. And these guys talk really, really fast. But they basically tell you the most important things that you need to know about what makes co-housing co-housing. So we're going to start with that, and then we're going to sort of go through a PowerPoint that gives you some photographs and some more detailed information, and we'll sort of unpack some of the things that these guys say really, really quickly. So the question is, how do we get it to play? I think, here we go. All right.
Well, a lot of us live with housemates, people you share the bills with but hardly ever speak to. But now some communities are taking the idea of housemates a step further. Co-housing communities usually consist of 20 to 40 private homes and lots of shared spaces like big kitchens and dining rooms for group meals, laundry facilities as well, and outdoor gardens. And all residents have a role in planning, designing, and managing the community.
Now, before you go yelling hippie, it's important to note that co-housing environments differ from communes in that there is no shared economy or common religion or set of beliefs, and residents own personal property. Now, the concept of co-housing is nothing new. It actually originated in Denmark in the 1960s and was introduced to North America by two American architects, Catherine McCammond and Charles Durrett, who wrote Co-Housing, a Contemporary Approach to Housing Ourselves. Well, right now there are over 150 co-housing communities here in the United States, and if you want to learn more about them, go to cohousing.org.
That's it. So basically, let me turn on some light. Oh. Okay, so technical genius. I am not. Do that. Okay. Now, bottom left-hand side, you can just put this one.
That one worked, yes. Great.
You don't know how moments
Zero
panic
technical
before you guys got here. Figure out how to work this thing. So, hallelujah. All right. Okay. So basically, first, any questions before we kind of get into this? Do you want to go over the
No. I was looking at Nancy.
door? Okay. Oh, you want me to leave it open?
It's okay, don't worry about it.
Which one?
That's cool.
I guess I should, just before we get into this, the sort of agenda of what we want to do is up beside Fred here tonight. So this should take us about half an hour, maybe to get through this, and then we want to take about half an hour for discussion with you guys and questions and thinking about different ideas. Take a 15-minute break, and then the latter part of the meeting tonight is really for people who think they might be interested in actually exploring this idea concretely, and like what would it take, and how would we form a group, and things like that. That the second part of the meeting is kind of sitting around in a circle and getting into some of the questions and how to actually make it happen if people here are so moved. Okay, so the co-housing, in a nutshell, introduction. It basically, what is co-housing? At its most essential, and co-housers are always having a hard time because there's not really a good elevator speech to describe co-housing. But I think the closest we could get is saying it is a neighborhood that is designed to intentionally support interaction and a sense of community among neighbors. And it seeks to do that through various means. And it's very, very intentionally trying to create a balance between the need for privacy and autonomy and a need for connection with the people around us. And so, again, as the little video talked about, it started in Denmark in the 60s, and the idea behind it was capturing what's sort of best about human-scale village life, but updating it and bringing in modern sensibilities and making it really more relevant for modern folks. So that kind of hopefully gives you a rough sense of what it's about. Co-housing is called a form of intentional community. There's a lot of kinds of intentional communities out there. Not all of them are made of houses. You talked about like community online. I think I heard you talking about that. Building community, there's a lot of ways that people build community, church communities, political communities, online communities, sports communities, whatever. What co-housing it does is combines creating a sense of community with a particular place. And so it's really trying to build community attached to place. So the question is kind of why co-housing, what is this, and why does it matter, and what does it contribute? And I think that from the reflections that Fred and I have done, and I think you hear this from a lot of people associated with co-housing, the reason that a lot of us have chosen to live in co-housing has to do with quality of life. And seeking quality of life through means other than sort of simply the material. And so it's seeking your quality of life through these rich set of relationships. It ends up really providing benefits to a range of different life stages, people in a lot of different life stages. And then another reason that motivates a number of people towards co-housing is that it's an example of what we hope is a more sustainable way to live in a number of different ways. Not just environmental sustainability, but also economic sustainability in terms of being able to share some resources and provide other sort of economic benefits, and certainly social sustainability. So when you're part of a social fabric, if something goes wrong, if you get sick or something happens, there's a lot more layers to your own personal sustainability and safety net. So we talk about community being the secret ingredient of sustainability. So something that in terms of why co-housing and what makes this different from a condo or on one hand, or I can't even say the word, the commune, on the other hand, that's what everybody calls it, but I think that what it comes down to, in what motivates co-housing is to, in my mind, trying to create more housing options for people. We sort of think about ourselves being this free market and having lots and lots of choice, but when it comes down to it, it seems like most of the housing options that we have really prioritize two things. They prioritize privacy and they prioritize convenience over pretty much every other value. And that's fine for people for whom that's really what they want more than anything out of their home. For some other people, another demographic, they want some other things. Privacy and convenience are not the most important things. And so, if you look at, your typical single-family home, you've got a place that really is a absolute temple to privacy and convenience, where you can drive right into your bedroom for your car, and you can walk into your house, and you've got safety and security, and you don't have to deal with pesky neighbors, and hopefully you have a service to mow your lawn, so you don't even have to really see or interact with them. And so that's both private and convenient, and so for some people that's good. And the same thing for townhouse living. You guys, people living really close to one another, next to one another, but where exactly are you going to interact with your neighbors in this picture? Like on that 3-foot, 2-foot doorstep right there? Like where is that going to happen? So again, you're sort of close to other people, but you're probably not interacting with them. And then in apartment living, same thing, you got tons of people living in close proximity. This should be a big party all the time, but the way that that this space is laid out tends, again, to try to maximize the benefits of privacy and, I guess, convenience in that setting. So, and that's in contrast to a co-housing neighborhood that prioritizes a very different set of things, and that is, as you can see sort of exemplified in this picture of a co-housing community in Denmark. It's prioritizing people, putting people at the center of the community, cars to the periphery of the community, and creating spaces for people to interact spontaneously and get to know one another and to develop familiarity and eventually care for one another. So co-housing kind of has two different design aspects, or you could almost say two different kinds of architecture that make it unique and help to create that phenomenon of interaction and mutual support and community. One set of things that help create that are physical design elements. And so we talk about there being sort of a set of elements that almost every co-housing community, no matter what it looks like, whether it's in the Southwest or it's urban or it's rural, are going to have in some form or fashion. And what these things do is they don't force anybody to do anything in this space, but they make it incredibly easy for people, right? So it takes down the barriers to spontaneously engaging with your neighbors, to running into your neighbors, to having a casual conversation. It just makes all those things easier without forcing anybody to do anything. So typically, core principles would be you cluster the housing close together, you face that housing inward into the heart of the community, and through the heart of the community are these pedestrian walkways. There are not roads for cars in the middle of the community. The cars are kept to the periphery of the community, the outsides, the backs of the houses. And you're also trying to create a whole array of inviting indoor and outdoor community spaces. So you have your private space, you have your private home, but in addition to that, you've got all of these wonderful spaces that can draw you out, whether it's a community garden or a little bench on the pedway or a children's play structure or whatever, or a picnic table out there that you can eat with your neighbors. Another key feature of co-housing communities is a common house. And this is, in addition to your private home, you have a share of this common house, which is again another inviting common space. So it's really important for folks to understand that co-housing is private home ownership usually. There are some rental co-housing communities and some communities that are half rental, half ownership. But the idea of having your private home, your private domain, is very much a part of co-housing. But that's balanced with these access to these community facilities, community spaces. So you have this gradient of private to fully engaged in community that you can kind of every day pretty much decide where you want to find yourself on that spectrum. The private homes and co-housing, there's a couple of things. They're basically conventional in most respects. The main difference from a typical home, apartment, townhouse, whatever, is that, again, you're trying to create this spatial or design gradient so that this portion of the house would be like a front porch, and that would be facing the center of the community, and this would be sort of a semi-private area. So you might be out on the porch drinking tea, and a neighbor feels like, okay, I can go sit with Fred. He's out on his porch drinking tea. If you want to be private, you go into your home or in the back of your home. It gets increasingly private as you go into the space. And so that's by design to allow people to choose their level of interaction and engagement. And then another really core piece is in terms of how people design their private homes is that you don't have to put everything into your own home that you want. There are spaces that a lot of us put in our homes that we don't use very much, like the second guest room and the movie viewing room and the pool room and things like that. You can put those spaces into a common house and get just as much benefit out of them, pay 1/33 of the price, and enjoy. And then it comes with people, which are things that are often nice to have in these spaces. So most common houses will have a big kitchen that can cook for a crowd, and will have a big dining area so that everyone in the community can eat together. Might have a lending library, people lend one another books, guest rooms, laundry, thank you, facilities, childcare rooms, children's play spaces, things like that are places where either you would want to be there with other people, or you can't afford to, or you don't want to put all of that space in your own house to heat it, furnish it, cool it, etc. So the other piece of the architecture of co-housing communities has to do with social architecture, which is kind of a weird term. But it is really appropriate in some ways to think of it that way, because these are structural elements of how co-housing communities function that really contribute, again, to the sense of community and reciprocity and trust and care that tends to evolve over time. So a big aspect of that is the fact that co-housing communities are basically planned, designed, and managed by the residents themselves. And that's kind of a lot for people. It's a big bite to chew, to chew right there. And different groups of different co-housing groups determine for themselves what level they want to engage in that. Some of them do it all themselves. Others hand off most of it to professionals. But to some extent or another, they participate in what their community is going to look like, how it's going to function, what the houses are going to be made of, etc. Most co-housing communities also use collaborative forms of decision-making, and 98% right now are using consensus. So, and that is something that also sometimes scares people a little bit, but consensus is actually very powerful, and I think we found over time.
As opposed to what?
As opposed to a majority rule.
Oh, okay.
So we don't do Robert's Rules of Order. We do consensus, which is everybody has an equal voice, everyone gets heard, and any proposal that comes forward, everyone has to be able to live with. You don't have to love it, but you have to genuinely be able to say, yeah, I can live with that. I think that's okay. And that, but through that, you're getting buy-in. You're not factionalizing in the community. And so in conjunction with that, there's a really strong intention to seek as many ways as possible to distribute power and responsibility throughout the membership. So everybody does something. Everybody contributes in some way, hopefully in ways that they are good at, that they enjoy, that they're drawn to or have an affinity for. But it's not just a small group of people, like in HOAs, sometimes you hear about like the HOA board and the tyranny of the HOA board. This is a very different model, and it's all about everybody participating, everybody having a voice, and everybody taking on their piece of the pie.
Yeah, I think it's worth underscoring that because it's not just different because people decide they want it to be or they hope it's going to be. By having an agreement that the decisions are made by consensus, that really does cause it to be non-hierarchical, and the power does get distributed. Because think for a minute that if you have to get agreement with everybody to do something important. Now, most groups don't make every decision, like what color they're going to paint the bathroom in the common house by consensus, but major decisions, and they'll decide that, how they want to sort that out, what are major and what are minor decisions. But if think of it, all the major decisions have to be done by consensus, you need to work with everybody, and you need to get everybody's voice involved. And so it causes groups to have these non-hierarchical power relationships, and that's what makes it so different.
Exactly.
It's not just the physical architecture, it's that kind of a thing that makes it really different from a typical neighborhood.
And the other thing is in taking on responsibility and doing some work and participating in various decision-making bodies and work bodies within the community itself, you gain legitimacy if you're going to bring something forward. And people in your community know, like, wow, Fred has worked and worked and worked. We know he's a member of this grounds committee and he's worked on this proposal and he's talked to us all about it. It gives him a sense of legitimacy in bringing his ideas forward. Whereas if you sit in your house all day and you come out and say, well, I don't like that, others in the community might be more likely to challenge you on some level because they.
I think another quick point to add with that is that if you try to do consensus for a whole town, say, where people don't have necessarily as much in terms of shared values and also relationships, personal relationships, really hard to do that. But in a group of, say, like in our community of 80 people, 60 adults, 20 kids, the relationships can be strong enough so that you can actually successfully bring consensus without completely getting bogged down. And that sort of thing. We've had like one block in 10 years or something like that, one blocking of consensus. So we always are able to make decisions.
And it can be challenging, but it's also, I think, the rewards outweigh the challenges on it. And then another important thing that it's no co-housing communities, to our knowledge, share personal income. And so that's not to say everybody does put money into a shared fund to support maintenance of the common facilities, like you would in an HOA or a condo. But your income is your income, your home is your home, and you're not expected to do income sharing. And that being said, you're also not expected to share the same ideology, philosophy, beliefs, religion, ecological practices, whatever, with your neighbors necessarily coming in. Most co-housing communities in their vision statements overtly welcome and value diversity and individuality. It's not about groupthink and everybody having to do or say or think or wear the same thing. It's about trying to work with people where they're at. And then another big piece of it, some of those people, it's true across most co-housing communities, and some people are surprised about this, is that most of the participation in terms of what makes the community go is voluntary. And so you don't have somebody looking over your shoulder and saying, did you da-da-da, and you get a penalty if you didn't da-da-da. Most people the group as a whole decides on what are the expectations, how much work do we have to put in as individuals, or how much money do we have to put in as individuals to make this thing go. And then you're expected to find your way to making your contribution. But because we all co-own the community, we all have an investment in having it work out. And so
there's room for different levels of participation.
Levels.
So you have all this social stuff going on in the community. People know each other and they're working together and doing things. But what's nice about it is people's lives change, and in a particular time in your life you might be too busy with outside concerns or your family life or something. And so most co-housing developments allow for that. And people, sometimes they might be very involved in what's going on, sometimes they might not, and that's okay. And it turns out it works pretty well, just allowing people to give what they can get.
Right, exactly. And so finally, most co-housing communities do embrace self-selection, which means that I know before I joined co-housing, I'd heard of like certain intentional communities you've got to pass you know, you've got to be interviewed by everybody, and people have to vote whether you're in or out. Co-housing communities usually people determine on their own based on observing the community and how the community works and how it feels, how they get along with how things are going. They decide for themselves if they want to buy a house there, if they want to live there. And it's not a vote you in or out on the island, off the island thing. So outside of sort of those structural aspects of the architecture of the community, there are certain things that basically you find are very, very common in co-housing. They're kind of like the bread and butter of everyday life, living in co-housing. And so one is community meals. At Shadow Lake Village, we do 2 formal community meals a week. People gather in the common house, and we have, sometimes we do a potluck, sometimes we have a meal team prepare meals for the entire group, and we rotate responsibility for that. Some communities do 7 meals a week. They do it every night. It just varies on what communities want for themselves. So that's a really, breaking bread with your neighbors, coming together with people a couple times a week is a really powerful way that helps to build those bonds and enrich relationships in the community. Another one is that thing that evolves in almost all co-housing communities is this voluntary sharing of resources, because it's so easy. I mean, it starts with like, I need an egg, I go next door. It's, you know, I know my neighbor, I get the egg, you know, whatever, and I give them some milk. But it ends up expanding into almost every aspect of life. Like, I don't know, childcare sharing, childcare cooperative kind of stuff. I share, my husband and I own one car, and we share a van with another family in the community because we didn't necessarily need 2 cars individually. And we share.
Well, it's amazing how much sharing happens. We have a listserv, of course, that probably most a lot of neighborhoods have them too. I think what happens in our community is that people end up giving and receiving so much that you can ask for almost anything. I mean,
Sometimes
amazing
really
stuff. But if you need some odd tool, somebody. It turns out for 33 families, somebody's probably has it, even obscure things. So a lot of tool sharing, any kind of household items, recommendations about who to go get your car fixed, whatever. And again, all sorts of things. And there's a sense that of wealth. Not monetary wealth, but kind of what the term social capital can use, right? So you're very wealthy there in terms of resources in all sorts of odd ways that become so much a part of your life you don't even notice it anymore. But like that story, I don't know if you're going to share that one. So we'll get to that. We'll demonstrate it for you later.
And that's true, I think, in terms of in talking mutual aid and support between neighbors. It's sort of just an extension of that. Not only do people end up, and also there's a lot of trust. There's a lot of 10 years of relationship. Fred knows I'm not lending Lisa books anymore because she, whatever. But she's okay with the tools. It's hard for her to break that, you know one another well enough to feel comfortable doing that. But another way that people share is people have different skills in the community. And so like just Dave is great with computers. If the computer goes down, well, Dave, he'll tell you what to do. And so different people have, Linda's a good quilter. If you have a quilting issue, those are always big quilting issues. but everybody kind of has their thing that they are good at, and everybody kind of knows what different people are good at and where they can seek support. And that is a wonderful thing as well in terms of, and a lot of times, again, talking about saving resources, that's something, if you can get help from a neighbor, you don't have to go buy it or, wait 2 weeks to
like folks on
fix your
mowers
toilet or
together,
something.
there's group shared mowers.
Exactly.
All sorts of stuff that I kind of forget about.
Another thing that's really common in most co-housing communities, and it doesn't have to be this way, is doing a lot of the work themselves. So we're cheap in our community, basically, I think. And so we end up doing almost all of the landscaping and the repairs and the maintenance on the common house and all kinds of stuff ourselves. So we organize work parties and and the thing that I just wanted to say about that for me personally is when at first when someone says, oh, there's going to be a work party on the weekend, I go, oh. But then when I go, it ends up, so work parties that I feel like end up being some of the most wonderful experiences living in co-housing. Because you're getting together with your neighbors, you're making something better, and you're working together and always have a good time, and we then have a meal together, and it's a really cool thing, and it ends up making work into something that's a lot more like play when you do it that way. So, and celebrations again are a big part of life in co-housing because you have these common spaces that you can come together, and it's very easy. Like the kids can organize a talent show or a play or whatever, and put the word out, and that night they'll get 15 people come watch it or whatever. You know, there's a lot of things that can happen very easily because you have the spaces to do it, and you have the ways of communicating very quickly and easily with people, and it's easy for people to come. So, and finally, one thing that I've really valued over the years about the co-housing environment is that it's created a space for my son to grow up and have the freedom that I felt like I had when I was growing up in the 70s. My parents had no idea where I was until dinner time usually. But I think that's largely kind of gone from our culture. I think we're much more worried. And in the environment of co-housing, because the kids are kind of surrounded by the homes and all of the adults know all the kids, and there's always kind of a loose eye on the kids, and the kids look after one another, that they can have this kind of freedom within a zone that's very, very safe and caring. And that has been, I think if you ask any of these kids, they
really love it. They love living there.
Yeah.
And I think some of them have a hard time leaving when they grow up to see what happens.
But first they got to compete into teenagers, and they'll probably hate
Yeah,
it
right.
when they're teenagers. So the bottom line, I think, is just the possibilities if these kinds of things are things that you value to enhance quality of life in various life stages. So we talked about kids. Another group that I think could really benefit from living in co-housing are young singles, people in their 20s and 30s. We have a number of graduate schools, not graduate students, living, renting rooms at Shadow Lake Village, and it ends up being a really positive experience for them. Even though they're not buying, they don't have the money to buy the houses, they still benefit from participating in the community and trying it out, even if it's for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And and I think also it's a way for folks in that age and stage of life to stay connected to others and not get isolated. And certainly for empty nesters and for older folks, the benefits are just pretty obvious, and I think many. So the core thing, as Fred and I have talked about this over the years, the core thing that we think is going on in co-housing and why it seems to work so well is there's this synergy going on that, this is two-dimensional, but you can kind of think of it as a spiral, is that you have these social and physical architectural elements of this community, and they're kind of like the only thing really. There's not a lot of rules beyond that. It's just kind of these things get put in place and go. And what that tends to do is bias the creation of familiarity and trust and reciprocity among the people living in that environment. And then as people develop those relationships and develop this sort of fabric of community, that ends up leading to all these really cool things. Ideas coming out, innovations and exchange and sharing, mutual aid, and then ever increasing kind of investment in one another and in the community over time, so that after a period of time you really feel very woven in to both the place and to the group of people that are living there. So,
and that keeps building. So as those relations deepen and people are innovating and relationships grow and there's deepened bonds, then the things like consensus process and sharing, things that happen deepen, and then people trust each other more, and it just keeps going, because at 10 years in, when we kind of reflected on that over the past year, it just kind of blew us away, how things have changed from the beginning. So
and how we've changed.
Yeah, it's changes people.
Yeah. So.
From going through the process.
Yeah, some people call co-housing the longest personal growth workshop ever created. That's true.
Group therapy.
Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, just thinking about more of the practical elements of doing an urban co-housing project in Blacksburg. Ours would not generally be considered urban. It's in city limits, but we're right adjacent to Brown Farm, and it's kind of spread out. So thinking about existing projects around the country that are urban and some really neat things that they've done. We just wanted to share with you some of the examples and see whether any of these spark interest or ideas or questions for you guys. So this right here is Eastern Village. It's in Silver Spring, and that is an old federal, I think, office building that they converted into more than 50-unit co-housing. And it's funny, this started out as a really a young professionals community, and now they're all having babies. And we were up there, and they had like, in 6 months, they had 12 babies. It was just like, whoa. So this community is really changing now, but so it's neat, and it's a nice, even though it's sort of apartment living, it ends up being a really nice place for families there.
Rooftop garden.
Rooftop garden, they're really eco, really cool. Tacoma Village is another DC area community that you could go visit, and it's a mix of townhomes and apartments. It's on less than an acre, and it's right next to the metro, the Tacoma Metro. And so they have a little bit less urban feel, but they are a really great community. They're about 40 units, and so very dense, obviously. And so here's an example. This is a Cambridge co-housing in Massachusetts, and they actually use modular construction to make these apartments that they built. And they have some mixed feelings about it, but it was an interesting sort of way to save some money and create a community. This is a new, increasingly common type of co-housing, which doesn't really have an elegant name yet. We're calling it in-plant retrofit. But this is Genesee Gardens in East Lansing, Michigan, and this is a group that was very low income, and they identified a neighborhood in downtown East Lansing that had houses built in the teens and 20s, and they, a lot of them were in rental, and they contacted the owners, and they were able to purchase a bunch of adjacent communities at the end of a dead-end street. And they had enough money, they were like $50,000 a piece, these old, beautiful houses. But they had to do some work on them. And they took out a alleyway, and they turned it into a common green. And so they basically made co-housing backwards from the housing that was already existing. And it's a really neat example as well. And they bought one house to serve as the common house. So they have quite a small common house, but they do have a common house. And that's a functional community that was quite affordable to me. This is Frog Song in Cotati, California, and I love this because this looks like this little green, lovely space, but this is in the middle of their downtown. And on the back side of those houses, this is a mixed-use development. So they have apartments above retail. And so they have a coffee shop back there, and I don't know what all, art shops and things. And so in the inside, you've got this really lovely little space, and on the outside, it's the street, and it's shops. And then this is Southside Park Co-housing in Sacramento. And again, this is like, these almost look like, these are pretty substantial homes, actually. They're clustered, but they're, kind of the size of a single-family home. And that you can see sort of how that could, this is in a residential, urban residential block of mostly single-family homes, I think. And they were able to take that block and turn it into a co-housing. So that kind of gives you some idea of the variations and the options that are out there right now. And so that's kind of an opportunity for us to think about whether there could be a co-housing in downtown Blacksburg and what that might look like and what the character of it might be. And I think as Fred and I were talking, the why, I mean, to us it seems obvious. I don't know, we're interested to hear what you think. I mean, that I know something that I love Shadow Lake and I will never move out, but I would love to be able to walk to the farmer's market. I would love to be able to hang out downtown and have a glass of wine and not have to call the neighbor to come pick me up from the cellar or whatever. I'd love to be able to just walk to the Lyric and hang out, run into friends, So it seems like this lifestyle, Blacksburg is such a wonderful town. It's got such a great lifestyle, and people of all ages, I think, would like an opportunity to live downtown in a way that they can also have community. And then the Who, again, as we were talking about this, we're aware, like we talked to Tim and some other people sort of in that 20 to 30 something age group. There's a lot of young professionals in Blacksburg. who are not necessarily, they don't necessarily have families yet. They may or may not be ready to settle down and buy a house, but our understanding is that there is a need, a sense for wanting to connect with other people, have a social life, have a community, you know, do stuff with other people on a regular basis. And so it seems like that could be a need that could be met, or that could be interesting. And we know that, you know, we've got some of these high-tech companies and stuff coming in, and young people, and perhaps this would be something that would appeal to them. We also think that young families living downtown, you know, young kids and things like that could be a really positive thing, as well as older folks. I mean, we know that people who are retiring a lot of times want to downsize and are valuing a different set of things than when they had kids growing up in the household and things. And so having a walkable existence, having access to those amenities can be very attractive for people in their older years. So anyway, and I think probably it could be attractive to many beyond that too. So then the question is where, and obviously we don't have an answer for that. We put up here, this is just sort of to try to spark ideas and conversation. Obviously the old middle school property, there's a master plan there. You know, we don't know the pace of when that's going to fill up. It seems like there's some property available there right downtown that could be an option. And then there's properties that are vacant or are dilapidated that maybe the owners could be approached, and maybe there could be some possibility of retrofitting existing buildings, whether in residential or in downtown mixed-use kind of settings. And so, you know, I think we're looking to you guys for some of those ideas. And I think it's important to say that, like, we're here to kind of spark conversation and ideas. We don't really have a dog in the fight. Like, it would be up to whatever group might end up forming to determine where and what kind of co-housing would be created. It's not our job to figure that out, but to help, hopefully. And so, and just very briefly in terms of the how do you create co-housing, as I mentioned earlier, there's many different ways that you can go. You can go completely self-developed, and you've got to have a really gung-ho group of people with a lot of skills who have a lot of time on their hands and some money. And that, we kind of did that. We didn't really have the money part, but we ended up mostly self-developing. And then at the other end of the spectrum, the great thing about self-development is it's all you. You decide everything for yourself, and you're really kind of in control. On the other end of the spectrum, if it's developer-driven, some developers, like out west, make a co-housing, and then they go recruit the people to live there. They just think it's going to be so in demand. In California, there's like 50 co-housings. So, you know, they feel like they can build them and they'll come. The most common is a joint venture where you get professionals partnering with groups, and each kind of does a piece of the puzzle that they do best. And then in terms of how you go from having an idea to start a co-housing to living in community, it is a process, and it's a major investment of energy and passion, and you usually need some burning souls at the outset who are really excited and jazzed up about the idea of creating a community and like the creative challenge. And I think our belief is that it's much more powerful over the long term if the group themselves forms. You're not going to get everybody who's going to live in the community who participate in creating it. But if you have resident voices helping make that community happen, I believe it ends up creating a much more authentic community over the longer term.
Well, I think from looking back on things and looking at some other communities too, that it's how you get started that determines how it goes even 10 years later. Right. So getting started right, and so starting out with distributed power and people doing it themselves and that sort of thing seems to turn out a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, the steps are, you know, again, you don't spend much money out of pocket in this phase of just forming community, and that's sort of fun in and of itself. But once you decide, you know, you get a piece of land optioned or whatever, the clock starts ticking and the money starts going. And so there's a very intense period for groups. For us, it lasted about a year and a half, I'd say, where you got a lot of money on the line, and it's just woo, and then it's over, and then you live for 10 or 20 years, and then you kind of thankfully forget. So, you know,
Glad-
it's like
glad
getting a
that you did it,
tooth
yeah.
pulled or something. I'm glad you did it when it's all over. And this is just sort of a sense of the kinds of skills and the components of getting it done. You could have professionals do some of the stuff for you, and you could have people in your group who do some of these things, but somebody's going to have to attend to the marketing, to the legal questions, to the financial questions, to the physical design, construction, land, all that stuff, questions, and to building a successful community of people who like one another and can work with one another and want to have their kids grow up in the same community.
Yeah.
So I think that's the end of the formal presentation piece. I have this little thing that
Yeah, why don't you read it?
just to end it, like we Xiaojin in our community does this SLV reflection thing. It's like a community newsletter. She does it once a month, and people just send in poems or comments or appreciations or whatever. And Jane Mahone, our neighbor, wrote this piece that I think really captures what life in our community is like now. And it's kind of hard to follow, so bear with me, but she says, recently Melanie asked me if I would grind some coffee beans that Hillary, Melanie's daughter, got from cat sitting for Will and Lisa, who got the coffee from Corey, who brought it regularly to them from the easy chair. All those people live in the community. At least that's the story I got. I got up the next morning, poured it into my grinder, and spent the next 15 minutes trying to get the grinder to work. I knew that Hillary needed it for some guests coming to visit and was flummoxed about how to make this happen. I walked out my front door, spied Jim Littlefield, and asked him if he would ask his wife Bobby to grind it and give it to Melanie sometime that day. When I got home from work that night at about 9 p.m., the Smiths had ground coffee, and there was a coffee grinder on my front porch. I later found out that Bobby had loaned me, without being asked, her extra grinder, and knowing how panicked I might be the next morning, placed it on my porch. I'm pretty proud of being an East Node dweller, but in my heart I know that even if I lived in the Central Plaza, the North Node, or the South Node, that coffee would have gotten ground, and I would still have been able to get to work on time. I tell this story in excruciating detail to thank all of my neighbors for being such good ones, and to also say that this is just such a typical day in the neighborhood. So I think that kind of gives you a sense. And that was this month's little newsletter, so it was funny. I thought that was fun. But I think what we wanted to do now was just kind of open things up for discussion and your thoughts or questions or ideas around co-housing in general, or about the possibility of doing a downtown co-housing. Is that realistic? Is there energy for it? Do you think that there would be demand for it, etc.?
So what is your interest in facilitating this conversation?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
Right. We're really wanting to just see co-housing developments happen all over the place. You know, there's about 150 in the country, but there's room for a lot more. And it's been hard for groups to make it. So we want to be helpful. And so we are offering this presentation just to see if we can get started. And then it just does what it wants to do. We're available to assist if asked or needed, but we have no other interest in it besides that. Simply, we sort of see ourselves as planting some seeds. We did workshops in another area, and we had some other folks in different places in the southeast that we're talking to. And so we're just sort of see ourselves going around planting seeds about this idea.
Yeah, we hope to continue to do workshops like this around the southeast, to kind of in locations that we feel like the population might kind of have some energy or interest in co-housing.
But the
Southeast
group needs to do.
US?
Oh, I'm sorry, what?
The Southeast. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But are you part of like a co-housing organization?
We just formed a sort of, I guess, consulting enterprise called Village Resources in the last year. And part of what we see ourselves existing to do is to raise awareness about co-housing, and we also ultimately want to try to provide resources and services to groups at the level that they would want or need, but to be available to provide services to groups that have formed to help them get to the finish line.
But we've learned that groups need to do it themselves. You can't do that for a group in terms of forming itself and developing those relationships and taking responsibility for their own community. So we know that it's, we want to plant seeds, but let them grow the way they need to grow. and stay out of it, but be supportive and helpful as requested. That turns out that our best information tells us that's the way you need to do it, because if a group, like there are some groups who talk about different models, ones where they're developer driven, a developer might have a piece of land and ready to build some houses and can just sort of pull together some people and drive that process, and we think it doesn't work out as well in terms of the community that you get. You might get the houses, we think you don't get as good of a community sense of connections as when people go through it themselves and take responsibility for it themselves.
And if you get a group that you've got a lot of skills and a lot of energy, and they can do it themselves, and they can figure it all out themselves, then that's sort of maximizing their ownership of the process.
Yeah.
But you really want members of the community to feel like this is our project. And you kind of have to. Well, there are communities out there that are built by developers and people move in, but I think that the more that people can contribute to the creation of their community, the more rich it is, and the more it's really theirs, and that helps the result. Yeah.
As a resident of a downtown neighborhood now, I think it's something that I think would fit right in downtown Blacksburg. I think it's a wonderful idea. Organizing the community first is essential to that. I know when I come out and visit you guys, I come out and work with Don on different projects, or come out there for some of the concerts that you have at your common house. I get excited about coming to your neighborhood. I rarely ever get excited about going to mine. So it would be nice to have two places in Blacksburg that I was that excited to go.
And is the urban idea that you seem to be kind of promoting, is that because you saw some properties that are downtown, or is it?
I think it came out of an awareness that, well, I think a number of different factors. One, I think when we saw the middle school go down, we're like, wow, there's property downtown. But also we were like, well, it's not our job to decide whether to go. We were like, it would be great if CoHousing went there, right? It seems a natural fit. But we're also like, we're not gonna start we live in a CoHousing community. We like living in our community. We're not gonna start and shepherd a whole new group and project to do it. So I think part of it was that conversation. Wouldn't it be cool to have CoHousing downtown? And I know a lot of us in our community have talked about we're just kind of too far out. We're a little bit too far out to really be part of the downtown life.
Like you said that, if somebody started this in downtown Blacksburg many years ago, you would have wanted to do that instead of living out there.
Yeah.
So, but, it's just an idea. If a group came together and wanted to have a co-housing development in Craig County or something, fine, that's great. So we just build it as urban co-housing, just thinking that it might be some energy behind that. Just a guess from people we've talked to who expressed interest in it.
Well, I can say we're one of those people that our whole concept is fairly soon we want to move downtown and be able to walk and be able to not have to drive home, and be able to have that glass of wine and walk home and stuff too. So the concept of having it downtown is really what made us interested in this, because it would be nice to be right there and get smaller while kids are leaving home now. And have shared community. Definitely is just for us.
We actually were imagining that we would sell our suburban home and buy an old building downtown and renovate it just for the two of us. And then when we heard what you guys were doing, we thought, this is great. This is much better than just one-off doing our own house, downtown. This is part of being a whole community. So, and I've followed Shadow Lake from the beginning. So I've always thought that that's the perfect synergy, the urban downtown pedestrian focused living with, intentional community. Can't get any better than that, So that, I personally, Karen and I both, the urban component of it is just central to our interest. If it be the will of the group that, we love co-housing, but let's do it out in the bush, then we would say that's cool for all of you, but that doesn't work for us. Because the urban aspect of it and the pedestrian focus and being right at ground zero, to me, just it synergistically makes the whole thing work. And I'm sure there are wonderful rural co-housing locations all over the United States or the world, but that isn't where we're at. So anyway, that's...
And you will often see that, that's something that fairly early in a forming group's identity comes up, is if group members if you have some group members who are really attached to an urban lifestyle and others who really want a rural one, to some extent those are mutually exclusive. So you may end up with two groups in that case, hopefully in that.
It depends. I think what happened for us was we ended up just trying to cut the edge on that. So we are in Blacksburg, but the edge of it and right up against, Brown Farm, what's now called Heritage Park in the National Forest, and that sort of worked out. But there were people, like Nancy and I wanted to be way out in the country when we first got involved in this.
And we wanted to be downtown.
We loved the group so much, and there was something. Sometimes the group pulls people into changing things, but it depends, right? But people were really attached. And I think what happens now, there's already one on the edge of town. So if you wanted to be outside of things, go by a place where we are. But I think we think that that there's some real interest in this.
Can you tell us the story of how you got it? You got enough people together that were interested in such an idea?
Well, yeah, sure. In fact, it was right in this building in '97. I think probably you were there, and to that first one I can't remember, but the first one was at our house. Yeah, the first meeting, right? Yeah, and so we did a presentation, about 30 people, put flyers around just like this time. 30 people came, and then we had a meeting 2 weeks later in her house, which was a mistake because about 15 people came. It was all crowded in her living room. It was really funny. And then we started meeting at, I think, where was it?
At the basement of the
Cooper House.
Cooper House, right? Cooper House. We met there for years, and so it just we just started working on primarily developing a group in terms of just getting to know each other, developing a mission statement or a vision statement. Starting to educate ourselves about co-housing and how you do it. And we're going to give you more information about that too, actually, so I won't jump the gun. We'll give you some information about those kinds of steps to take if you're going to start something. Give you some tips about that. But and it took us 4 years to move in. From the very first meeting to move in was a little under 4 years. It took us about a year and a half to locate the property, so that kind of slowed us down. Sometimes it's a matter of just kind of finding a spot. It took us that long to find a spot because we tried to do everything ourselves, and we didn't use good professional help to locate the spot. We didn't know what we were doing. We were being amateur real estate developers, and then we finally got smart, got some consultation, and that helped us to. We could have gone faster. In other words, in short, we could have gone faster, but some take even longer. I mean, you can.
Right.
You
Some
can
people
fool around
have
for
been
years.
groups for 13, 14
Yeah,
years,
right.
and they have potlucks and they get together, but they don't.
So one of the reasons why we're doing this is we think groups can do it a lot easier. They can still do their own thing, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm. And the reason we really got into this was over the years we've had these conversations. We were like, when we were a forming group, if we knew what we know now, my God, the amount of money and time and grief and pain and suffering we could have saved. And so I think that awareness that in so many groups reinvent the wheel. So many co-housing groups think, it's like, what if first people don't know this? We've got to figure this all out on our own. And nowadays, thankfully, we don't really. There are resources out there that can help.
Yeah, we're not just talking about Lisa and I too when we
No.
say that. There's lots of resources out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the old Blacksburg Middle School property is definitely a prime location for such development. I mean, I know there's a master plan. I don't know how committed the backside of that is to what the plan is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely be interested in seeing if I could help work with other people to make something like that happen in downtown Blacksburg.
Well, and even immediately behind the old middle school, there's the Sigma Epsilon fraternity house.
Mm-hmm.
And they're moving on campus to Oak Lane. So they're selling their property. And if you Google it, it's not only their actual house, but then it's got a fair amount of land around it. They have a sand volleyball pit, and they have parking for all their cars and everything. So, and that's immediately behind the old middle school. And they're doing this design build new house right on Oak Lane. So, so they're definitely going to be selling that property.
We'd have to move pretty quickly or probably get something like that.
Take advantage of that.
When you guys were forming, how, I mean, it seems like in order to get the capital for something like this, does it require, I guess it might require a certain amount of money for people to stay involved? Is it
Over
lead
time.
people out that way?
Yeah, if you remember that kind of stair-step diagram that I showed, in that first portion, which can sometimes last kind of a long time, there's not very much money involved. I think in our group, we put in like $20 to join the group. And that was just kind of to say we were...
Needed a few bucks for advertising.
For advertising and whatever, and we did potlucks every 2 weeks together and whatever. And then when we were ready to start looking at land seriously, and we started having some more, we hired somebody to come in, and finally we hired a professional to come in and at least talk to us about what we need to do. We had to pull more money together in that sort of second stage, and then once we were ready to buy land, then we did have to put money on the table.
It tends to relate to, think of if you buy a house, you've got to make a down payment. So home ownership requires some financial ability. Although there could be rentals. But in terms of the development part, right, you're generally going to be putting in, likely putting in what amounts to your a pretty good down payment. But not right up front, but at the right times when there needs to be some more risk taking and you're getting closer, you're developing and moving towards construction. It's an important issue because groups struggle to not price members out of the project. Now we succeeded pretty well with that. Of the people who were committed, everyone was able to move in. So we didn't have, even as prices skyrocketed, you think you're going to do for this much and it turns out to be that much. And we had some real shockers along the way. I won't go into the details, but our engineering estimates of how much the infrastructure was going to cost were way off. The professionals got it wrong, and they were like way more. Yeah, and we thought we were sunk, but you know what? Things can work. We did real well with the construction costs, and so it worked out.
And the other thing I would say about financing co-housing, and it's not easy, but what's kind of neat about it is that, like in our group, we had people at a range of different life stages. I mean, my husband and I were 28 or whatever at that time. We didn't have any money. We didn't have any money. But then, some of the other members of the community were at a later stage of life. They had a lot of savings. They had a lot of money at their disposal. And so in the project, over time, we developed enough in our relationships and our trust for one another to be able to set up and it was all done legally, et cetera, a lending scheme within the community. So people who had money invested, it was at risk, but at a pretty high rate of return. And then those of us who really didn't have any money to put in, just kind of put in the minimum that was necessary to kind of play. And so what we ended up doing, and then those people got paid back for their investment significantly at the end of the project when all the houses kind of started selling.
And we were able to do that, and it's important to know, we were able to do that without affecting the power dynamic. So in other words, if you put more money in, it didn't give you more power. It was just, basically it was just you lent money to the development LLC. Yeah. And you were getting a rate of return off it. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, and it can seem kind of daunting in the beginning. And definitely, sometimes that could scuttle a project. You're not able to make it work. Or in a particular real estate market, you can't buy a house. Too many people can't afford it. But Blacksburg has always been expensive. But we built different size units. We had a set of townhouses that are 800 square feet, and those were they were our affordable units. We concentrated some grant money that we were able to get on those units, and actually a couple other units that weren't even the smallest ones. So we were able to make it affordable for the people who were involved. Some of the people that was tighter to get in. So can't guarantee that you'll be able to do that, but it's certainly possible to make arrangements like that.
The kind of cool thing when you're working as a group is you can be a lot more creative and you can access a lot more possibilities than you can as an individual. Because you can, you know, figure things out in a way that you have, because you kind of have that social capital, you can come up with solutions that if you're just going to the bank and saying, you know, I want a loan to build my house, this is how much money you have to put in down payment, you know, they're not really going to sit with you and come up with a creative solution.
Was each house financed individually, or?
Well, we ended up doing a lot development model because we were self-developed. And this stuff might sound confusing to folks who don't know much about real estate development. Keep in mind that none of us did at the beginning, and then we got more knowledgeable there. At least some people in the group did. Okay, but it's also useful to get professional input about it. You're an architect, Tim, and you know a lot about this stuff. But so we went with a lot model where we sold lots, and then that paid for the infrastructure costs, or helped, as we sold lots, we were able to fund the infrastructure costs. We did get some, we had sort of a quasi-developer relationship with our builder, which was Community Housing Partners, and they were able to get us a small amount of, luckily, revolving loan financing that also helped us to sort of get the infrastructure in, and then people got construction loans for each of their, we bought lots and got individual construction loans. That's how we were able to do it. Now, that's a relatively slow way of doing it. Our houses were built over the final house. It was probably took 3 years to get all the houses built because the first set of them went in probably in the first year. People were already in, and then we kept selling houses and having them built as we went along. The way you prefer to do it is right to have them, is you get enough units pre-sold, typically something like 75 or 80% of the houses pre-sold, and then you can then it's a pretty good deal for a bank because it's almost all pre-sold, and then you can borrow the money, just build out the whole thing. That lowers construction costs a little bit, sometimes because they can just do production housing, construction, this sort of thing. That's ideally how you want to do it.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had any difficulty obtaining financing because it's a different model.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And so you have to, again, using professional help to be able to pave the way to talking well with banks. And we had to educate ourselves how to do that. And the group has to get organized well enough to be able to work with banks to seem legitimate enough. And by using professional help, you can do that. I think one thing that is an advantage is that pre-sold piece, where the group is doing the marketing, essentially, and has some very committed buyers in place, and that can offset. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that co-housing is a little more established now, almost 15 years later than we got started. So,
and I went to a meeting in a ULI, an Urban Land Institute meeting recently in Florida, and gave a presentation on co-housing, and I was amazed at the I thought we were going to get, I thought they were going to be like, yeah, whatever, weird, but they were really receptive, and I think interestingly, they were saying partly because of the difficulties in the housing market and the shift away from homeownership to rental and the moving to smaller houses and all this stuff, that everything's kind of up in the air right now, and it's loosening things up. So the assumptions that lenders and banks were making when we were building, they were like, that will never sell, that's ridiculous, you can't have an 800 square foot house next to a 2,000 square foot house, and it's not viable. Now they're going, oh yeah, well, we got to think about everything differently. So there are huge challenges in the current housing market, building market, and there are some interesting opportunities too that may be advantageous to
And I know that there's co-housing that's, I don't know, maybe 100+ people, but there's got to be some sort of critical mass level below which it isn't viable. What do you think?
Well, there's a range, of course. I think the most common stuff is 20 to 40 units. Is probably the most common. I think that there's certain places that call themselves co-housing that was little 6. But yeah, what happens is when you're too small, when you're really small like that, you don't have, you might not have many people show up at the common house, or when you get low enough numbers, you could get these, this flows in and out of people's energy and their focus and things like that. And so you could dip down into really low numbers about activities and just might not get enough kind of critical mass.
Right.
And then getting the work done.
Yeah.
Community, like, it becomes really hard, and then the resentments. It's easier, if you have like 100 people, if
Somebody will pick up the
10
slack.
are sort of slacking, but a whole bunch of, you always have enough people to get it
Right.
done. If you
So
have,
so you would say 20 housing
40,
units?
but it goes even higher now. There's some units that are as many as, what, six, was Tacoma Park like 60?
Eastern Village is 50.
Yeah, some of them are up to almost 60. Once you get too big, then it gets, are you going to know everybody real well? You know, and so that gets outside. And then there's just sort of the scale of it gets complicated in terms of
I was
organizing.
thinking that realistically, the potential, the challenge is at the low end, not at the high end.
Yeah.
I somehow just don't think that within like the next 6 months, there's gonna be, 60 families all clamoring to be a part of this.
Yeah, right.
I think the potential is at the other end, that there's 6 or 8 families totally gung-ho and struggling to get X number of families, because then there's a sort of floor threshold that you need. So would you say, what, 20 families is that? or-
Well, I think it depends on the site too, development, that drives, so, and it's out, we have 33 households on our plan because the property we got, that's all they give us was 33 houses, but that turned out to be a really nice number. We think 30 is, I think, is just about right.
But in terms of the early stage of,
Yeah, right.
of making co-housing happen, we had about 10 families for a long time in the project. And that 10 families made a lot of the early decisions. But it was a good representative sample of the people who were going to eventually live with, right? And so once, there were some people who said, yeah, keep us posted. We'll get in once you have some land, or we'll get in once you've got some house designs, or we'll get in, So we kept, identifying people who were interested, but not everybody wants to be an initial, doesn't have that creative energy of the burning soul kind of. It's just going to be like.
Right, we broke ground, got land and went through the development process with between like 13, 18 houses. We actually started, and probably the first house we started construction probably about 18. So just to give you an idea, but I think there's probably a fairly wide range of how that's gone now in terms of the course of it. There's probably groups that have actually broke ground with, earlier or secured a piece of land with a lower number, but I think the conventional wisdom on that in terms of co-housing developers, they're thinking, yeah, you want as many as you can pre-sold at that point. You want to take the risk, and also to amass the capital to, let's say, secure the property and stuff like that. So that kind of stuff.
Well, it would seem to me that urban land intrinsically is a lot more per acre than suburban land. And, when you amortize urban land over fewer people, that's when it starts, I would think, to get really difficult.
And they also tend to be very dense and on much smaller pieces of ground, too. Like, for instance, a lot of those when you're showing them, they were like 1 to 2 acre sites, actually.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, but still, it could, depending on the urban setting, it could be a lot more risk-taking. So I think you want to go to the break, right, and then come back and do this. So maybe we should
Yeah,
do
yeah.
that.
So I think what we want to do is break for about 10 minutes. I think 10 would be good.
Yeah, 10's good.
And if people need to go do whatever, we've got some books. The co-housing books are over there.